All right, so I think that we're going to go ahead and get started. First, I just wanted to thank you all for joining our Lunch and Learn today. And today we're going to be talking about securing your Microsoft 365 and Google Workspace accounts using our PatrolDOG MDR with Cloud Response Service. On the call today, I am joined by Aaron Matassa and myself, Rebecca Altamar, and Aaron is from Blackpoint Cyber, our partner. And then I'm from Tab Computer Systems. And then, we want this to be an interactive discussion. So if you have any questions throughout the presentation, please feel free to use the chat and or the Q&A, and they will be addressed. And if it's something that we feel the whole group should know, we'll break the presentation and Aaron will chat about it for a few minutes. And then we also will reserve some time at the end to answer any additional questions. But with that, I will go ahead and hand this over to Aaron.
Thanks, Rebecca. So as Rebecca mentioned, I'm from Blackpoint Cyber. I'm a sales engineer, and we really do love questions. So please keep them coming, and we're open to it. But the first thing I wanted to share is earlier this year, Blackpoint Cyber released an annual threat report. And in that threat report, one of the big takeaways that we had was that about 78% of the attacks that we were stopping were originating from our cloud response service. And Blackpoint's cloud response protects the Microsoft 365 and Google Workspace environments and identities. And this is a trend that I feel like earlier this year, or I feel like late last year, it was about 70% or something like that. And it's just something that is continually increasing. And recent stats, actually, since this deck was published, it's closer to 80, 83% or so. So it's a staggering approach. But one of the things that we always get asked that I always want to clarify is that ransomware, in fact, is not dead. And we're going to talk a little bit about how this ties into identity fairly shortly. But really, what's really happening with ransomware is overwhelmingly a large majority of environments, organizations are refusing to pay it. But these criminals still want to get paid, right? So what's happening is they're relying on something called double extortion. So when they do successfully infiltrate an organization, they're deploying ransomware, but they're also stealing data. And they're stealing this data and then holding it hostage and threatening to release it, even if you don't pay the on-premise ransom because you have proper backups and you have a partner like Tab to make sure all of that is together. But with all of those, and what we're here to talk about today is the identity. So ransomware is not dead. We're seeing a lot of attacks in the cloud, and a lot of this is focused around what we're calling identity. What we mean by identity is, think of a technology called single sign-on. If you have a Microsoft 365 organization, you typically sign into your computer and your email in the cloud with the same exact username and password, right? That's a simple example of what we call single sign-on. And this single sign-on is fantastic. You can use this for not just Microsoft applications, you can use this for third-party applications. Say you use something like a Salesforce or your HR payroll system, right? Rather than managing a ton of different usernames and passwords, you can have one single password, and then you log in one single time to access, to authenticate as that identity. And the less times you enter in your password, the less opportunities you have to be impacted by attacks like multi-factor authentication spamming, man-in-the-middle attacks, and a multitude of other just plain old phishing attacks that we'll talk about. But the problem with single sign-on, and you're also making it the least path of resistance, is the most secure path for our staff. But the problem is once that identity is compromised, that threat actor just gained access to all of those applications and environments that you had that ease of access to, right? So you're really funneling everything through this one gate that we really want to protect. And this is where Blackpoint sees the future of tradecraft attacks going, which we'll talk about tradecraft very shortly. But we're seeing over 10,000 brute force attacks per day across our environments. And this is just a staggering number that we're seeing. It's basically folks knocking on the door, trying to get in and looking for the easy win to get into there. So the other thing that we like to talk about is these are criminal organizations. We call them threat actors sometimes. We call them adversaries, but really they're criminals nonetheless. And they're organizations. I don't want to credit that fact. These are businesses. These are not teenagers typically in their mom's basements anymore. These are criminal organizations that are very professional. And just like all of us, they're looking for the highest return with the lowest amount of effort. So please put it in the chat if your business is looking for the lowest return with the hardest amount of effort, because we'd love to talk to you. But so uh, so these organizations are typically a lot of times targeting small and medium-sized businesses, right? We see a lot that of the large headlines of these big healthcare organizations that got hit recently, oil manufacturers and utility providers and everything. And sometimes we think that it won't happen to us because we never see our fellow businesses on the news. But the truth of the matter is that small and medium-sized businesses are overwhelmingly hit because they don't have the funding and the resources to properly protect themselves. Maybe they're not prepared because they don't have the proper education, right? Which is leading them to be overarchingly vulnerable because they don't understand how to protect themselves, making them that easy target. And the really big aspect is we see these large breaches in the news. We don't see stories of the everyday mom and pops getting hit by businesses. But just because you don't make them, just you're not, but the problem is that we're not too small to get hit, is that we're too small to make the news because it's such a common occurrence these days.
And Aaron,
So,
I think that that's an important point to bring up because a lot of our clients are small businesses, but
mhm.
not seeing it in the news, I feel sometimes we think that, well, that's not going to happen to us.
And we hear it all the time. And in the line of business I've been in, the easiest way to get an organization to increase their security services is after they've gotten hit, which
Right.
is not the position we want to be in, right? It's great because it's all of a sudden there's a budget and we can get into the proper protections and stuff, but we'd really rather be in there ahead of time, right? Um,
Yes.
so yeah, we've all seen that story far too much, and it's also your cyber insurance is a really big driver of this. Actually, I can't tell
Hmm.
you how many organizations I've seen increase their security maturity simply because the cyber insurance now mandates protections like multi-factor authentication and uh, and patching of applications.
Yep.
So, is it worth defining multi-factor authentication?
Mm. I mean,
Yeah.
I mean, you could go ahead and define it.
Okay. So we talk. So we're going to talk about it a lot a little
Hmm.
bit later. And just for anybody who's not aware, so multi-factor authentication is that really annoying thing of when you sign into a website and wants you to either type in that code or get a push. But there's essentially there's three different factors that you can have. It's something you know, something you are, and something you have. So something you know is going to be something like your PIN or your password, the one that you name after your dog with exclamation mark at the end, right? Something you have is going to be your phone. So when you get a push notification on your phone or you get a text message confirming your phone number, that could be something you have. Or maybe now even these pass keys could be considered that as well, a factor that as well. And then something you are is going to be something like your Face ID or your fingerprint reader that you can also use through your phone. It's going to be your biometrics, right? So combining two of those three factors will create multi-factor authentication.
Yep.
So where does Blackpoint focus on this? So we talked about how Blackpoint, we're on-premise to the cloud. We talked about how the attacks on the 365 and Google Workspace identities are just ever increasing. Uh, on here, I like to focus that Blackpoint is really on this tradecraft side. And I like to define this because a lot of us have heard of the phrase malware, and we know that we have an EDR like our Microsoft Defender, right? Um, and tons of others that will automatically catch these known bad files and known suspicious activities. But Blackpoint is really here to focus on those criminals that bypass these automated layers of protection. And they use legitimate tools, the same tools that Tab may use to support yourselves, or that if you have administrative folks may use internally, and they look to blend in like a standard user or a standard systems administrator in what we call living off the land. I have an analogy that I'd love to share for this, and I think it always resonates a little bit more fun than talking about remote access tools. Let's just picture that we're at home, right? Which I guess half of us at least probably are. But let's just picture that we're at home, and at home we have a kid. we have a liquor cabinet and we have a teenager, right? My daughter's a little too young to fit into this analogy quite yet, but let's just say that you have a liquor cabinet and you enjoy to partake in whatever you keep in your liquor cabinet, right? But you don't want your teenager to do the same. So what are you going to do to protect this liquor cabinet? You could put a bunch of cameras and monitors and biometric sensors and sharks or laser beams to get around this. But by the time you actually get through all of that, uh, it's going to be a pretty demoralizing experience. You're probably not going to be in the mood to enjoy this liquor anymore. So instead, what we do, and honestly, what most business processes are like, is that we have a standard lock and a key, and we hide the key, right? And when we need it, we go into our bedroom, and where we store the key, into the dresser drawer, third drawer to the right, under the pants, and we grab that key. We close the drawer, we exit the room, we close that door, we go into the liquor cabinet, we open it up, and we have ourselves our heyday, right? We complete our business process. But when our teenager wants to gain that unauthorized access, right? They're going to say, the key is somewhere in this room. That's the door, right? They're going to gain this access, right? And they're going to not know where this key is. So they're going to search around. They're going to look under the bed. Maybe they go to the dresser drawer, the left-hand side, under the socks. Maybe they go into the closet, into your coats, and rummage around the pockets. Maybe they go into the bathroom and open the medicine cabinet. These are all things that you do on a day-to-day or week-by-week basis in your room. But the order and method and the way that which these actions are being executed is more exhibited of a user who does not understand the environment and does not know where things are, and is instead trying to figure out what account did I just compromise? What device did I just land on? Whose identity do I have? What privileges do I have? How do I elevate those privileges and then spread laterally across this environment? And that's the activity that Blackpoint is looking to detect and then take that active response to with a human SOC analyst 24/7, and then coordinate this with the TAB team to stop the bleeding, put gauze in the wound, and then work with TAB to get y'all back up and operational as quickly as possible. So we talked about identity, and this whole webinar here is focused on their identity and cloud response. We've talked about here in June we had over 450,000 instances that we saw as potential data exfiltration, right? And there's multiple methods that we can have for data exfiltration when you have the identity compromised, right? So when someone accesses that identity, they have access to things like your Microsoft 365 email that they can perform external forwarding rules to. They can access any other third-party applications that you might have integrated. Um, but additionally, overwhelmingly, we talked about how your credentials for your local computer are typically the same as your credentials for your email account in the cloud. And this connection that you have can also allow them to pivot from your cloud identity to your on-premise machines as well and spread laterally across your environment also. So it's really important to have that mix of protection there across both sides. So how do threat actors get past this, right? Because we have stuff like multi-factor authentication, we have spam filtering, and we have all of these tools and techniques, right? We have security awareness training, and our users are really on top of it. Um, and really, this is the whole name of the game is about building in layers of protection to hopefully filter out most of these attacks, right? And then being able to detect them when one does make it through. Some common techniques that you see here is plain old phishing. Most of us has probably heard of phishing before. This is done on multiple of different avenues, from fake domains, spoofed email addresses. It could also be in search engine optimization, SEO poisoning, where you get fake ads as well that people click in and they just don't realize it, and they put in their credentials to this new link, right? But another one that is happening a lot is info stealers. So if you haven't heard of an info stealer before, it's a piece of malware that essentially what it does is it's delivered typically via a phishing attack or a search engine advertisement poisoning attack. And it's this piece of malware that gets downloaded onto your computer, and then it's stealing information. It's stealing things like the credentials stored in your web browser, looking for banking information or access into your environment. It's stealing things like like VPN configurations now. So if you connect to your corporate network and you have a configuration file, it's specifically looking for those items, right? Amongst multiple other data points that it can use to further steal your identity. And then these are all followed up by used to either fill in data points, or people are just simply using credential stuffing attacks, right? So credential stuffing attacks are when I have Rebecca's username because got it from a breach, and then she has that password, that my favorite dog 123 with exclamation mark, and she reuses that password across her Facebook and her work and her bank. And I'm just going to guess a low effort guess and have that combination and see where it works based on the accounts that I know she has or think she might have, right? Um, and then so we use this credential stuffing and see what we can gain access into, and and then we have access, right? So these are all important reasons of why we want to, one, train our users to identify phishing attacks properly, right? I like to say that I've fallen for phishing attack myself, a simulated phishing attack at work, so it really can happen to all of us. Nobody is immune to this. Um, uh, have these info stealers, if something does get through, having something that can detect and automatically clean out these info stealers, but also be able to look at the remnants they might leave behind, trying to maintain persistence because they know they're malware, and your EDR can sometimes only do so much. But then also having proper password hygiene, using password managers and not sharing passwords, especially across your personal and work identities. And please, let's use different passwords for our bank accounts at the bare minimum. I've had actually a scenario that was not fun where I had a customer report an info stealer attack, and a number of the users managed their personal bank accounts on their work computers. And so their work was compromised, had info stealers, and their personal bank accounts were compromised then and drained as well. It's even if they get all the money back, which a lot of times the banks have protections, it's still a disruptive event, and your accounts are frozen, and it can be a lot of heartache as well. So
I think I think, Aaron, that you make a good point about the passwords. I know that. So at Tab, we're required to change our passwords every 90
mhm,
days. And it's like every time it comes around, you're like, oh my God, I got to think of a new password. But we don't realize how important it really is to change your password. I mean, even every 90 days, we're all having to think of a new password, and then we forget, and then we get locked out. And it is it is a pain, but knowing what could happen if we use that password across multiple accounts, and then even if someone does get our username in the example that you just said, making sure that we're changing our password helps to eliminate some of those.
exactly. And there's a lot of techniques to create an easy to remember password that's hard for
Mhm.
computers to guess as well. A lot of times you can string four random words together. Like horse correct battery staple is the iconic one. Just don't use that one.
Don't use that.
And it's something that we can easily remember as human beings because we can tie a story around to it. But for
Hmm.
some reasons, robots don't like stories. They just don't get it. So it's not something they remember.
That's a good tip.
So all of this, and the question that we usually get a lot is, great, someone stole my username, somebody stole my password, they gained access to my account, but we have that multi-factor authentication, right? Which is something we absolutely should have. But we still got hit, right? And we get this question a lot. And it's not always super clear why. So one of the attacks that a couple of the ways that folks usually get past this is first through MFA spamming, is what we call it. Um, this is when someone looks to access an account, a criminal looks to access an account, they have that username and password, and they prompt for the MFA. And then we simply get annoyed with it or accidentally hit yes instead of no. Or they do it over and over until we click yes. And then one time is really all they need, right? Another method is called SMS spoofing, or text message spoofing, where they actually steal your phone number. So if you get a code through your cell phone, they can steal your phone number and then receive that text on your behalf and then authenticate that multi-factor authentication as well. There's a lot of ways you can go around and phishing resistant MFA and all kinds of fun stuff. But it's still there's always going to be a way. And one of the ways that we see a lot is actually what we see here, which we're not going to go through the technical details on this slide. We actually have a fun video that I think is fun that we'll go through called a man in the middle attack. And essentially what you're seeing on this timeline is that the user, you know what, why don't we just go ahead to the video and take a look at it and see what it looks like. So I'm going to move this over really quick. All right. So this is going to be someone bypassing multi-factor authentication via a man-in-the-middle attack. So we're going to start off looking from the criminal's perspective on this malicious web server. And what you see here is a tool called Evil Jinx. But don't worry about the specific tool. There's tons of different ones that are open source and criminals make their own, right? But what they're doing is they're constructing a malicious fishlet, is what it's called. They're going to spoof Microsoft 365, trick the user into logging into their own domain, and then they're going to sit right in the middle and pass the authentication from the user to the legitimate one using their own proxy tool. So we're looking and watching them set this up. And so we'll give them just a second because what they're doing is they're creating a mail server. Now, if anybody can look and see that login.office.co.uk that he's on, that I was not an I. And we'll see that in just a moment. But here we see that they're creating an email account. They're coming from our CEO, John, and it's making it very urgent and important. And they wanted to complete a task and rapid speed, all the telltale signs that we would see in our security awareness training, right? So as we pivot to our user's computer, so what they're going to see from our perspective once we receive this email address. Here's our Microsoft Outlook. We see the malicious email that was just crafted. It says John from blackpointcyber.com. And I have a link to click, and I click this link, and I thought I was logged on to my Microsoft 365, right? But if we see at the top left-hand corner that login.office.uk, that I is actually a 1. So this is typo squatting is a common method to get past this for users who are on superlists. So this is a threat actors control domain that he's passing everything back to the Microsoft 365 domain. So we're putting in our username. We're entering our password. So the criminal just took our username. He knows exactly what our email address is. The criminal now knows exactly what our password is because he's passing that right along. And now we have a sign-in request to our phone, right? So we're going to approve this sign-in request. And what happens now is that your web browser sends a piece of code called a session cookie from your web browser's computer to Microsoft 365. But remember, this criminal is right in the middle and he's seeing everything stream. And so you gain access to your Microsoft 365, you're on the threat actor's domain, but the document you're looking for isn't really there, huh? So this is a little weird. So hopefully at this point, we would call our IT call tab and say, hey, something looks suspicious, right? And that's the number one way these things get caught really early, besides having a detection response firm. But as we look here, we're back in the criminal's machine. And we can see that he's going to look at the session. And this bit of code right here, that's what's called the session cookie. They're going to go ahead and copy this, and that's the authentication they need. This is essentially the key saying, I am me, let me in, I have access. This is my token. So we're going to go into here, they entered in the username, don't even need to enter in the password. They're going to do what's called inject a cookie into this browser. They've inserted it, and now they're just going to simply refresh this page. Once they've refreshed this page, they have this token that says I'm authenticated, and boom, they are right here in the 365 instance. So at this point, once they've done this authentication, there's no more multi-factor authentication prompt because from Microsoft's perspective, that token was the multi-factor authentication prompt.
So once they're in that user's 365 account, they have access to that 365 account. And then what typically would they do after that?
That's a great question. So a couple of different paths they might take. A lot of times we see them spam out into other email accounts because they're looking to spread laterally. So they may email everybody in the organization and then email a lot of people in their address book as well to see what other companies they could first compromise, right? Because they know they're on a timer, especially if they have somebody like Blackpoint with Tab looking after them, right? And they're trying to spread that access. Additionally, they're going to do things like create inbox rules. They're going to create inbox rules for common keywords like "you've been hacked" or reply alls. If they're trying to specifically target the CEO, they may take the CEO's emails and put them all into your junk folder or into your RSS feed. I don't know what they have against my RSS feed. I tend to like mine, uh, and then additionally, they're going to take those credentials and they're going to see what other applications that you have access to as well. So they're in the discovery phase, where they've gained that access. They're looking for discovery, and then they're looking for persistence. So we see a lot of times where they actually may add additional MFA tools because we have this token they've stolen. But that token is only as good until someone revokes it, right? That will get revoked when we change our password or we can do a token revocation. So those are no longer valid. But what they'll want to do is they'll want to add their own phone or their own phone number or their own email address as a recovery option to your account or as a secondary multi-factor authentication option. So that if it gets revoked, then they can easily do this without having to prompt the user to accept their MFA again.
Wow, so with just that, they can really cause a lot of damage.
They can, absolutely, if nobody's looking.
Luckily, you're looking.
Luckily, we're looking. We're constantly tuning all of these detections, and then we back them by our 24/7 SOC. Our detection to response time these days, I think I did one recently over the past 90 days. It was sub 25 minutes from
Wow.
detection to when a threat analyst kicks that criminal out of the environment. And then we're picking up the phone, we're calling tab to inform y'all of exactly what just happened, why we're calling y'all, and then what the next step recommendations are.
Impressive.
Yeah.
All right.
But with yeah. I think we're just about time, but I'd love if there are any questions or anything like that.
Yeah, does anyone have any questions? Doesn't look like we have any questions. We've got a few more minutes if anyone wants to ask anything. We are here. If you think of something after this presentation, recording will be sent. But if you do think of something and you have some questions, you can reach out to Tab. Our contact information is on the screen, but we will be happy to answer any of your questions and give you a demo. We could do a demo of what the back end of Blackpoint looks like. It's pretty impressive, and we value their partnership as they've helped us with a few of our clients already. Well, I guess with that, we will go ahead and, oh, looks like we do. Oh, thanks, Linda. But if nobody has anything else, we'll go ahead and end the webinar. And like I said, you guys will get a recording of this. And thank you, Erin, for joining us today. This was